Welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk outside of Spartan Stadium, Michigan State getting ready to play Rutgers here in the stadium. First time they've been here, 3 weeks since the Wisconsin game, then bye week, then Michigan, then of course last week the big win at Illinois. Today interviews, Scotty Hazelton came out, spoke with the press a little bit, Malik Spencer, Jalen Hunt. Interesting day, Keon Coleman. After you win a game, a lot of people, there's more positive stories, and it was interesting to hear what some of those people said. I didn't see all of Hazelton, you did. I'm catching back up on that right now, but what were your takeaways about defensive coordinator Scotty Hazelton and what he said today?
I think there's a certain amount of satisfaction with him that they were able to make lemonade out of lemons. I mean, when you think of the guys that they had out there, especially when you look at the defensive line and you have the defensive tackles, 4 defensive tackles playing, so that's a big deal. I think he's also excited that, the guys like, Malik Spencer, whom you just mentioned, and then Jaden Mangum, who played a lot, and he played better than he has in some of these previous games. So there's a satisfaction from Scotty Hazelton that this defense is getting better in the red zone. They're executing game plans. Aaron Brulé's another guy. They got better. So there's an excitement level from Hazelton that guys that have been pushed into action maybe before they should have, or into bigger roles than they would have had otherwise if everyone was healthy, that these guys are starting to make plays, and that this defense is starting to overcome things as opposed to just languishing in the same type of situation, giving up yards, giving up points. Mm-hmm. These guys are making progress, and we've seen it. I mean, it's not like a fool's gold type thing. We've seen it in 3 straight weeks. The big thing in my mind right now is you've got this good feeling that your Michigan State defense, you know what you've overcome, but how do you keep on building on it and stacking it? Because last week was a pretty big accomplishment. But now, as a lot of guys have said, they're going to be taping them having 4 defensive tackles at defensive end. Rutgers is probably going to do some things to try to take advantage of that. People are going to try to do some things to take advantage of Malik Spencer or whomever. And, the big deal now is building on it, because if Michigan State loses this weekend or loses, to Indiana, then this game is – you can look back and say this was one of the high points of the season, but it loses a lot of meaning, because you want this to be a huge, waypoint on the way to a bowl game. Yeah, prior to the Illinois game, there were people on the message board, I didn't necessarily disagree with them, that said things along the lines of, well, the season's a wrap, it's a wash, now I'm ready for basketball. That victory over Illinois changes all that. It's still football season, still working toward getting into a postseason, maybe something better than a bowl game against a MAC team in Detroit or something like that. That is still out there, and they're playing for this week. We wrote about that yesterday, and I suspect that the level of maturity on the team has proved itself in a lot of ways, staying focused, and I suspect they'll stay focused for this game against Rutgers. Rutgers has lost, 5 out of 6 or whatever. Michigan State needs to hold serve and make that happen, and I'm not doubting them right now. And the defense has a lot to do with it. You mentioned 3 straight weeks, mentioned that. Against Wisconsin, I think the Badgers scored 3 touchdowns, 1 in overtime, but 3 touchdowns. Other than that, and 3 is a manageable number. Michigan State's defense has given up some yards here and there, but not many touchdowns. Last week Illinois scores 2 touchdowns. Michigan State got stoppages on 4th down in a variety of different ways. Aaron Brulé's an interesting one. He came out and spoke today, like you said a minute ago. A guy that I thought was going to have a huge role from the beginning. It's been a slow, gradual build, but that guy's obviously stayed present. Now he's a guy that they have to play. They need him now with Windman out, and of course Darius Snow having been out. Brulé has some versatility to him. Michigan State's a team that doesn't have a lot of pass rush ability without Windman. So when Michigan State came with pressures against Illinois, Michigan State didn't sell out with wholesale blitzes very much. A lot of times it was Kimbrough would be the 4th guy rushing, or Brulé would be the 4th guy rushing. They were still going to cover with 7. They weren't going to wholesale and try to get by with 5. It was still a 4-man rush, but they know they don't have defensive ends that can beat anybody. So sometimes they'd hide who was going to come and try to put some pressure on, and sometimes it was Kimbrough. And then other times when Kimbrough snuck into the slot, it was a threat that he was going to go, which was effective also. But Brulé's a guy that was utilized on the pass rush. He's getting pushed behind the quarterback sometimes. He needs to make sure he stays on the mark there, but he's a guy that can give them a little pass rush. He can also play some inside linebacker, played some outside linebacker when they went 4-3 for a couple plays, not as many as I thought. And then man-to-man, he
cover to tight end and cover 2 zone Tampa 2 down the seam. So it's a guy that can cover, pass rush, do some things. Nothing great right now, but he's a versatile piece that they can put in different roles, and maybe he could be more productive here in the last 3 games.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about his versatility, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's taken him a long time to make an impact, because he's got more to learn in a short period of time than maybe some other guys that are, like, let's say a nickel comes in and you've got kind of a limited role. But I think just talking to him, this game was huge for him. But I feel like confidence-wise, starting to understand what's going on within the scheme, his different roles. I think, it's cliche to say the game is slowing down for him. But when he felt overwhelmed by everything that was potentially being asked of him as a linebacker, and I feel like he thinks he can do it now, and he's taking pride in that. It's nice to have versatility, and Michigan State has some versatile guys. Whether you talk about Xavier Henderson, obviously the defensive line is interesting with that, some unexpected versatility. Jalen Hunt and Deshaun Mallory playing defensive end, but Aaron Brule is a guy that's got to keep on making plays, and a guy that's getting confidence, a guy that's feeling good about himself. And we talked about just a little bit ago about even against Wisconsin, Wisconsin moved the ball on them. Minnesota moved the ball on Michigan State's defense. But these guys are starting to take pride and gain a little bit of an identity, I believe, in red zone defense. And that's, if you want to gain an identity as a defense, if you can do that in the red zone, that's huge, because then all those yards you're looking at and say, well, this team put up 400 yards against you. It's hollow if you're holding people to field goals or less in the red zone. And really good defenses are teams that have pride, that believe that they're going to stop people in the red zone. Michigan State, for all intents and purposes, shouldn't have that belief, but they've done enough of good things red zone defense-wise. They believe in themselves, and they're – they don't want to let teams into the red zone, but when they're there, they're not going to panic. And we've seen really good Michigan State defenses in the D'Antonio era have that same kind of mindset. These guys aren't near as good as those defenses, but the fact that they're doing some good things against good teams in the red zone is a huge positive, and it shows a ton of growth because you think earlier in the Mel Tucker era, if something went wrong, if someone gave up a third and long, that was a touchdown, man. It was, you just knew it was going to happen. If you had a personal foul penalty, you knew it was going to be a touchdown. Mm-hmm. So these guys taking pride in that and showing the kind of growth in that area is big, because they didn't do it last year as much. This is a good thing, and to be doing it now against these kind of power teams is a big thing. They can't take the foot off the gas pedal. They got to keep on doing it. But if they can kind of add to that each week, then you got to feel positive moving forward, because it's not just Xavier Henderson or Jacob Slade or guys like that. It's young guys. It's everybody doing their part, and that's where you get culture, is when everyone does their part, because you have seen really good growth. I
agree with that, and you make a good point about having something to hang your hat on, having an identity, and red zone defense is a great place to start. And part of that is the run defense, which has been pretty solid. I know Michigan put up good numbers against Michigan State, but when you're coming off consecutive games against Braylon Allen, Blake Corum, and Edwards, and then against Chase Brown of Illinois, three really good rushing attacks. And I don't know if Michigan State gave up. I think Braylon Allen had a 34-yard run early in the game. Other than that, there have not been a lot of explosive runs of more than 20 yards. And you might say, well, that's no big deal. It is a big deal when you're playing those teams, and Illinois is running tailbacks at you, 40 times to keep it contained, get to the red zone, get to fourth down, then make stops. That's how you limit them to 2 touchdowns and 15 points. Excellent job with that. And we talked about this on the way back from Illinois, that if you're Brett Bielema or the Illinois coaches, and you're getting ready to scheme against Michigan State, and Michigan State's coming in 3-5, a bad Michigan State team having a bad season, and you're Illinois and you're number 14 in the country, and you're a 16-point favorite. You turn on the film, and then you turn on the film after you played them, and you're like, Michigan State was kind of low-key talented. Because if you're Illinois, you're like, Jalen Hunt was a third-string defensive tackle, and that dude's playing defensive end, and he looked kind of quick. I'm not saying he was coming off the edge like Lawrence Taylor, but he looked quick
for
enough.
a 300-pounder. For a 300-pounder, he looked really quick.
And he was quick with his takeoff. And you look at his high school film, the guy played tailback. Deshaun Mallory. These are former third-string defensive tackles that are getting by at defensive end against the highest-rated running back in the country. If you're Bielema, you're like, they're 3-5. We're a 60-point favorite against those guys. Low-key talent. Aaron Brule. There's some games this year where he played fewer than 15 snaps. He comes off the bench, has to play more. He's playing three positions. He's running around doing some athletic stuff. They go to the Michigan State goes to the bench, brings Malik Spencer in. They've never seen him play at all. He looks okay. Mangum goes out there as a true freshman, makes a real nice sweep tackle on that tight end. You got other guys doing some things. Cal Halliday's improving. He's always just been a guy. Last year he was freshman All-American as a redshirt freshman and was productive and solid and accountable. In that game against Illinois, I thought he took like some veteran steps. He's starting to look like an upperclassman. I know he's just a redshirt sophomore, but if you're Bielema, you're like, man, hey, they had some low-key talent working for them there. The running back started working better and had offensive linemen coming off the bench and producing. So Michigan State, they were tied together. Good coaching, good focus, but also they tapped into some talent depth there that was one of the reasons there was expectations this year to begin with.
And I think it goes beyond that too. I think you got to look at the offensive piece to it, because if Michigan State doesn't move the ball on offense, if they don't get first downs, if they don't march up and down the field, then all that talking about that unheralded talent, it's not there. It's the same team that it was before. The fact that these guys are able to rest, the fact that these guys are able to rotate. So if Brett Bielema is a defensive coach, he's going to turn on the film, and one of the first things he's going to look at is defensive linemen. That's kind of like for coaches, like, okay, what do they give the interior defensive linemen? That kind of dictates everything that you can do. Michigan State has 4 of the better ones in the Big Ten, one of the better collections of defensive tackles in the Big Ten. So, low-key talent, unproven guys in some areas, but it starts up front with those D tackles. And on the other side of the ball, I felt like this is Michigan State's best game by the offensive line. You go back to that 1-yard touchdown pass from Thorne to Trey Mosley. I can't think of too many instances against too many teams that Michigan State would have been able to that Thorne would have been able to hang onto the ball long enough for that thing to develop and for him to make that pass. I can't think of too many instances where Thorne would have his best receiver on the year and Keon Coleman taken away by a really good cornerback, and they'd still be able to find ways to complete passes, whether it's running backs. So Michigan State did things on offense they needed to do to make the defense the best version of itself, and I think that's what often goes maybe overlooked, is if the offense isn't doing its part, the defense can look really bad really fast. And you saw that like you see that a lot of weeks for a lot of teams. Like if the offense does some things and the defense gets rest and they can make adjustments and guys aren't out there playing 15 snaps in a row consistently. So those things work together, and kudos to Michigan State's offense for helping Michigan State's defense along, because those two sides have not worked together very often this year.
And you saw the defense play better because of that, like you're saying, and Michigan State's offense did that against a high-ranked Illinois defense. And I know Illinois put up those defensive numbers against weaker opposition, but they're difficult to move against. It's difficult to run against because they outnumber you. They can outnumber you because they only have to keep one safety deep because those corners are so good, among other things. Michigan State able to run enough to get it going. Peyton Thorne said that number 31, their corner, I think that was Witherspoon, he said that's the best corner he remembers ever playing against, if I heard Thorne right.
And that's high praise, because Thorne is like one of those guys where he's begrudging in his praise. He will say some nice things about guys, but it's always gritting his teeth because he's a competitor. He doesn't want to admit that.
I think he compliments
opponents. He does, but usually not as much beforehand, and it's not as easy for him to be effusive in his praise as it is for some guys.
Yeah, and it's not like Lou Holtz says everybody's great.
My point is, I guess with that is that Peyton Thorne, when he says that someone's a great corner, and he's seen a lot of really good ones, that means something. And the fact that he was willing, to not go to Keon Coleman and go to other guys. It helps when other guys are Jaden Reed, of course, but the fact that he was able to, take the best options for him under the circumstances and not force it, and that's not always easy for a quarterback.
And that could and should help Jaden Reed if more teams are doing that. And that's kind of where we're going. I went with a line of questioning when I asked Thorne a couple of things. Is after Keon Coleman, some of his explosive games this year, are you noticing that defenses are starting to skew things more to him, and what does that do for other people? Jaden Reed, like you said, they started utilizing him more in this past game, but Keon Coleman going against 31. Coleman's very good, but he saw a good corner coverage guy there. It reminds me, this is later in the year of year number 2 for him, but I remember earlier in the year for Plaxico Burress when they went to Oregon in 1998 and were blown out. I can't remember who the corner was, but as good and as talented as Plaxico Burress was, he ran into some press coverage there that he wasn't quite prepared for, realizing he's not ready for the NFL. He needs to go back to work, go to practice, come back the next year. He didn't have the option to go at that time, but that can help ground guys and get them back to work. And Illinois has got a good corner there. Michigan State came through it, got a big win. Now, Jalen Berger, the running back, spoke today. Also, you spoke with him a little bit. When we were watching that game, something I don't know if we mentioned in the VCast after the game. Michigan State ran the ball, but they did not run the ball well outside. They tried running outside, 5-10 times, and every time it was stopped. Illinois did a great job pursuing out there. And Berger mentioned, he said, we knew we wouldn't be able to run outside in the wide zone, so that's why I was cutting some of those in. So it's almost like Michigan State needed to establish that, to set up some cutbacks. Illinois did a great job stopping the wide run. Michigan State needs to continue to work on that, and they've had some Brandon Baldwin is new at left tackle and so forth. But I thought that was interesting that Berger said he kind of, in so many words, was setting them up for some of those cutbacks. So Michigan State went to work on, that's another way they went to work on a very good defense, finding some cracks here and there for every inch they could get.
Yeah, and it shows like the kind of, I said before that I thought this was one of the best games that the offensive line played, but that shows the growth right there, because it's one thing to say we're setting them up, it's another thing to take advantage of that uber aggressive Illinois defense on some of those cutbacks, because we've seen games in the past where you might run something to set someone else up, but then when you run the play that should go for a good distance, it doesn't, and that shows kind of, I think, the growth of Jalen Berger. I think he's the guy that looks comfortable for the first last week, for me at least, watching him run. He was comfortable, really comfortable for the first time, and comfortable with physicality, comfortable with his decision making. Everything was decisive, and I thought the interior defensive line did a nice job for him. But that was the best game that Jalen Berger's had. It's definitely something he can build on against a good defense, and I expect more from Jalen Berger moving forward.
And Rutgers is not a good team. They've had trouble at quarterback and so forth, but they've got a pretty good defense. Their defense was highly ranked going into last weekend. I don't know where it ranks now, but it's a top 20 total defense. So for Michigan State to keep it going on offense, they're going to get a good defensive challenge. Schiano is putting together a pretty good defense there. So more work to do against an opponent coming to town with Michigan State with a lot on the line still, as they begin to feel good about themselves and they're enjoying playing football. And I give credit, we've talked about how Michigan State stayed focused, but that comes from the top two, Mel Tucker, and what he's been able to do to keep people focused. And when Michigan State was, when they were down in numbers against, even against Maryland or even against Minnesota and against Ohio State getting blown out, it was no small thing that Michigan State individuals were still taking on collisions and still playing hard. I've seen teams quit here. I've seen Nick Saban teams quit in the middle of a game. Or not the entire team, but some players, you just see breakdowns. Saw it with Bobby Williams, saw it with John L. Smith. Have seen no hint of that in any game that Mel Tucker has coached here. And that might not sound like a big deal, but when you're losing games and you do have adversity, that is a reflection of the way the players are willing to sell out for the coach and listen to him and just keep pulling that sled. And then when you do get some health back and you do get a tighter feel on your schemes and so forth, then that foundational thing can pull you through like it did last weekend. So the leadership at the top, there are signs that's been pretty good. And, Jalen Hunt coming out and starting at defensive end, great job by him. A guy that, the motivation thing there might have been wavering a little bit. We had heard he says his motivation is high now, as you'd expect him to say. But he's gotten on the field, played 40-plus snaps, and he feels real good about that. He came into camp, he revealed today, at about 345 pounds. He had some off-season injuries and ailments and procedures and so forth, and then he put on some bad weight, and camp started 340, got towards season, it was down, and then as you get into late September, the weight was more workable. So you're seeing a Jalen Hunt right now that was not really available to the coaches earlier in the year. So he's come along at a good time too, and that builds into all of it as well, Paul.
Yeah, you wonder and you hope, if you're Michigan State, that he kind of has one of those like lights on moments like Micajah Reynolds did back in the day.
Yeah.
He ended up being a really good defensive tackle out of Lansing Sexton. Started out of his offensive lineman. Sometimes that happens. It's rare, Jalen Hunt with the guys that have come on behind him. I thought he was going to be lost in the desert, never find his way back. But credit to him, and maybe this is all he needs to really kind of start things. But him and Deshaun Mallory both, those are guys that you want to call them barometer guys.
Yeah.
I will, because it would have been really easy for both those guys to just mail it in, finish their degrees or whatever, or transfer out. Deshaun Mallory, obviously, when he lost all that weight, he was not going to be the guy that he was before. I didn't see a way for him back, given Michigan State's interior defensive line depth, but he kept sticking with it, and he found a way. And I think each of these past 3 games where he's had to play a lot, he's gotten better every single game. So that's a barometer in my mind of program culture. And then Jalen Hunt as well. It would have been really, really easy for him to be, disengaged from everything, but he stuck with it and kept working. And that kind of says a lot. It speaks well to Mel Tucker's program. It speaks well to Scotty Hazelton, the defensive line coaches, and all that. And it speaks well to Jalen Hunt that he stuck with it, because it's tough to be up here and projected as, like a lot of us, myself included, felt like he could be one of the best defensive players in the program 2 years ago. Well, that hasn't materialized. So a lot of times those guys just disappear altogether. But the fact that he stuck it out, kudos to him, and it shows a lot about the culture of this team. We'll find out more about the culture of the team if they keep on building on what's happened the last couple of weeks, and I expect that they will.
Yeah, and it gives Michigan State fans a reason to stay tuned and stay interested in this. Got a chance to get a win here. Michigan State fans have not been on campus in a while. I think the weather's supposed to be good this weekend right now. Sunny at about 47 degrees right now. Feels like November a little bit. It's going to be warmer this weekend. A great time to come out and tailgate, Paul.
One thing I wanted to say about Rutgers real quick is they started out basically 3-0, I believe, or 3-1, and the thing that I think they did really well, you talk about Shiano being a defensive coach, I think they got better on the defensive line. They got better at stopping the run. But in those wins that they had, against Boston College to start out, and it's kind of like, well, that was kind of an eye-opener for me. But in those games, those teams had, I believe those teams struggled at quarterback a little bit. They did not have explosive skill players. So it was a deal where Rutgers was running the football and stopping the run. Michigan State is a different type of animal for a 4 and 5 team, in that they've got a quarterback, they've got a growing offensive line that's getting confidence, and they've got, you talk about Keon Coleman getting all that focus. Jaden Reed got it earlier in the year. So you got Jaden Reed, Keon Coleman, and then you got Trey Mosley, some other guys. So Michigan State has more weapons, than other 500 teams. It's just a matter of putting it together.
It'll be interesting to see if Matt Carrick is back on the field. That injury, he never was carted off, but he's had injuries in the past. Brian Green came in and did okay in some areas and had some struggles in other areas. Vandermark's got to be ready. Wigginson's got to be ready. So now those redshirt freshmen that have just been kind of waiting their turn, now they're squarely in just a little tweak away from being in there, maybe playing 40 snaps. So they got to be ready for that. So that just makes that's another group of people in the room that are tuned in, ready to go, presumably, and that'll be interesting to watch. And
as well. That's where it helps that they had all those reps in the spring. I just feel like all those reps and all the injuries that hurt Michigan State in the spring, I think it stunted the development of the offensive line going into the season. But now, as guys have to step up into those roles, these past reps that they got are valuable.
And I wonder what that did to the defense. Guys like Van Sumeren struggled in September. I talked about that. He played better last week. Avery Dunn played better after he got on the field a little bit. Might those guys have been further along if the spring had been more productive in terms of having more offensive linemen available? I don't know, but we'll continue to watch the Spartans here.
If you're on a rep count and you need reps to get better, then obviously, we're talking about like padded reps. We're talking about 11 on 11 reps. If you have an 11 on 11 rep count, there's only so many reps that can go around. And a guy like Avery Dunn, who's not high in the pecking order, isn't going to get a lot of those reps. So, yeah, right. To your point.
Yeah, because he did not look good against Minnesota, but he's been getting better since then. And several other players have as well. All right, for Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. Been watching the VCast in East Lansing with the Spartans, SpartanMag.com.